I never thought my own daughter would throw coffee at me in public. All I did was refuse to co-sign her loan, and suddenly, I was the villain in her story. What she didn't realize was that this moment would change our relationship forever, and not in the way she expected. Hit subscribe if you believe life always finds a way to balance the scales, because this story proves it. I never imagined a simple coffee could turn into a battlefield. I was sitting at my favorite cafe on a sunny Saturday morning, nursing a latte and enjoying the quiet hum of chatter around me when my phone buzzed. It was her, my daughter, Emily. Seeing her name made my heart lurch in a familiar way, equal parts warmth and apprehension. She had a habit of popping up unannounced, her energy always filling a room before she even walked in. And while I loved her, I'd learned over the years that Emily time often came with a storm hidden behind a smile. When she walked in, she looked exactly the same as she had since she was 16, confident, a little too polished, her hair in perfect waves, her designer bag slung casually over one shoulder. She waved at me, and I waved back, smiling despite the tight knot in my stomach. She slid into the seat opposite me, eyes sparkling, but I could see the tension behind the surface. "How are you, Dad?" she said, her tone light, almost playful. But I knew that tone. It was the one she used when she wanted something. "I'm good," I replied, trying to sound casual. "How's work?" She shrugged and laughed, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Same old. But I've got some exciting plans coming up." There it was. That familiar phrase she always used before dropping a bomb. My stomach tightened. I had learned to read between the lines with her. Exciting plans usually meant money. Money she didn't have. We chatted for a few minutes about her apartment, her work, mutual friends. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth, trying to delay the inevitable. She laughed at a story about a coworker, and for a moment, it felt like the old days. Just father and daughter enjoying a Saturday. But beneath her laughter, I sensed the tension growing, like storm clouds gathering at the edges of a sunny sky. Then she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if to share a secret. "Dad, I need your help with something big." I paused, my instincts flaring. "Oh, what kind of help?" She tilted her head, batting her eyes in that way she knew made people soften. I had seen it countless times, but I couldn't let it sway me this time. "I want you to co-sign a loan for me," she said casually, as if asking for sugar in her coffee instead of a massive financial responsibility. I nearly choked on my lat. "Emily, that's a lot," I said, my voice catching slightly. "A cosign means I'm responsible if something goes wrong. You know I can't just—" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on, Dad. You know I'll pay it back. I just need a little boost to get my apartment sorted and maybe a car." I set my cup down, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I had spent my life working hard, saving for retirement, making sure that even if life turned unpredictable, I'd have some security. And yet, here was my daughter, asking me to risk all of that on a whim. "I can't, Emily," I said firmly, keeping my voice calm. "I've told you before, I can't put my finances on the line for you. You have to find another way." Her expression changed instantly. The playful sparkle in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something sharper, something that felt like betrayal. "What do you mean you can't? You always say you love me. This is your chance to help me." "I do love you," I said, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "But love doesn't mean I take on debts I can't afford. I can't co-sign this, and I won't. You'll have to figure out another way." She froze, staring at me as if I'd just insulted her, then laughed. But it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was sharp, cutting, filled with disbelief. "You can't be serious. You're my father. You're supposed to have my back." I swallowed hard, feeling my chest tighten. "I do have your back," I said slowly. "But having your back doesn't mean taking risks that could ruin my future. I'm trying to teach you responsibility, Emily. That's part of loving you." Ooh, for a moment, she looked like she might storm out, her lips pressing into a thin line. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms and staring at me with an intensity I hadn't seen since she was a teenager angry about curfew. "So that's it. You just say no and leave me to figure it out on my own?" "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry, but yes." There was a long silence. I tried to sip my coffee, but it had gone cold. The cafe around us hummed softly, the other patrons oblivious to the tension at our table. I watched her closely, feeling the emotional tug of war that always happened when she didn't get her way. She wanted me to feel guilty, to bend, to compromise my principles for her comfort. But this time, I wasn't going to. Her voice broke the silence, higher now, almost shrill. "You're being ridiculous. You don't understand anything about my life. You never have." I felt a pang in my chest. She had always been dramatic, but this felt different. It felt personal. "I do understand, Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I understand more than you think. But I also know that enabling bad choices doesn't help anyone." Her hands slammed on the table, making me flinch. "Bad choices. You're the one making the bad choice! You're choosing yourself over me." I took a deep breath. I could feel my face growing hot, the embarrassment creeping in as other patrons glanced our way. I wanted to explain, to make her see, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was too far gone, caught in the whirlwind of her own frustration. She leaned across the table suddenly, and in a moment of pure impulsiveness, she knocked over her cup of coffee. It splashed across the table and onto my sleeve, the hot liquid burning slightly, but more than that, it was the shock of her action, the audacity. I froze, my mind racing. This wasn't just anger anymore, it was humiliation. "Emily," I exclaimed, standing up abruptly. People nearby turned to look. I could feel my face flush, the sting of embarrassment sharper than the coffee on my skin. "Why would you do that?" She didn't answer. She just sat back, a mix of defiance and satisfaction on her face, as if she had proven some point I couldn't see. The cafe was quiet now, everyone pretending not to watch, but I could feel the weight of their attention. I took a step back, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. "I can't believe you just did that," I said, my voice shaking, though I tried to keep it under control. "I'm your father. I'm trying to teach you something important." She rolled her eyes and stood up, gathering her things. "Yeah, whatever, Dad. You're impossible. You always have been." And just like that, she walked out of the cafe, leaving me staring after her, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief swirling inside me. I sank back into my chair, taking a shaky breath. The coffee had stained my sleeve, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the realization that my daughter, my own child, had crossed a line I never thought she would. She had humiliated me in public over money, over a decision I made out of love, and for the first time, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal as clearly as any physical pain. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the empty chair across from me, replaying every word, every gesture, every tiny sign I might have missed. I thought about all the times I had bent over backward for her, the sacrifices I had made, the moments I had chosen her happiness over my own comfort. And yet, here she was, acting as if my care and restraint were nothing more than obstacles to her desires. I knew that this moment would change things. I didn't know how, or when, or what the outcome would be, but something inside me shifted. For the first time, I realized that love wasn't always enough. That sometimes, standing firm was the only way to show care, even if it hurt in the short term. As I finally finished my now cold coffee, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. The storm had passed, for now, but I could feel the aftermath settling around me like dust. This wasn't just about a loan or a cup of coffee. It was about respect, boundaries, and the kind of father I was willing to be. And deep down, I knew that the next time she came to me with demands, I would no longer be the same man who simply said yes out of fear of her anger. Something had changed in me that day in the cafe, something that would guide my actions in the days and months to come. I just didn't know it yet. The cafe felt different after she stormed out. The chatter, the clinking of cups, the soft hum of music, all of it seemed distant, like I was watching through a fogged window. My sleeve still bore the stain of her coffee, but the physical burn barely mattered. What burned more was the shock, the betrayal, the raw awareness that my own daughter had just crossed a line I never imagined she would. I sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, telling myself that she had overreacted, that she was just frustrated. But the words felt hollow. Frustrated didn't begin to cover what had just happened. Humiliated, disrespected, attacked, and the worst part, it wasn't just about the money. It was about control. She wanted me to bend, to give in, to erase all the lessons I'd tried to teach her about responsibility, self-reliance, and respect. I finished my cold latte in a single, bitter gulp, and then I left the cafe, stepping out into the crisp morning air. I could still hear the echo of her laughter, or maybe it was my imagination, mocking me from the table. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of every step, wondering how it had come to this. How had a simple act of refusing to cosign a loan turned into a public humiliation at the hands of my own child? By the time I got home, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. I poured myself a glass of water and sat in my favorite chair by the window, staring out at the quiet street. I replayed every moment of the encounter, every word she had said, every gesture, every glance. Her tone, the way she had leaned forward when she threw the coffee, it was all so deliberate, so charged with contempt. And yet, I kept reminding myself that she was my daughter, the child I had raised with love and care. Surely she couldn't mean it entirely. I decided to call my friend Mark, someone who knew both me and Emily well. Maybe talking it through would help me make sense of what had happened. Mark answered on the first ring, his familiar voice a comfort. "Hey, Dad," he said cheerfully. "You okay?" I hesitated, then sighed. "Mark, it's Emily. She humiliated me today. In public, over a loan." There was a pause on the other end. "Whoa. Slow down. What happened?" I recounted the story, from the coffee meeting to the spilled latte, to her yelling and storming out. As I spoke, I could feel the anger rising again, but also a strange mixture of sadness and disbelief. Mark listened quietly, letting me speak, letting the words pour out. "Wow," he said finally. "That's intense. I can't imagine how you must have felt. But Dad, it sounds like she's more focused on her own wants than she is on your feelings. You did the right thing by standing your ground." "I know I did," I said, though my voice wavered. "But it hurts. I've spent my whole life providing for her, supporting her, making sure she had opportunities I never had. And she treats me like I'm the enemy now." Mark was silent for a moment. "You know, sometimes children forget the line between love and entitlement. It doesn't make it right, but it might explain why she acted the way she did. She's used to getting her way, and when you said no, it probably felt like a betrayal to her, even though it wasn't." I leaned back in my chair, letting his words sink in. He was right, of course. Emily had grown up in a world where she often got what she wanted. I had tried to teach her independence, but maybe my willingness to occasionally step in had spoiled her more than I realized. And now the lesson was coming back to me in the form of humiliation. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, paid bills, checked emails, tidied up the house. But my mind kept drifting back to the cafe. I imagined her walking home, smirking, proud of herself for making me feel small. I imagined her friends hearing the story and thinking less of me. It was a sharp, bitter taste that lingered in my mouth. By evening, I decided I couldn't just stew in silence. I had to understand what had driven her to such extreme behavior. I pulled out my old journal and began to write, hoping that putting my thoughts on paper would help me untangle the mess of emotions. I wrote about her childhood, the small rebellions, the teenage tantrums, the way she had always tested boundaries. I wrote about my own mistakes, the times I had given in when I shouldn't have, the moments I had chosen comfort over discipline. As I wrote, a pattern began to emerge. Emily's anger wasn't just about the loan. It was about control, about feeling powerless in a life where she wanted to dictate every outcome. And my refusal had stripped her of that illusion of control. That realization brought a mix of relief and dread. Relief because I understood her motive. Dread because I knew it meant more challenges were ahead. I took a deep breath and set the journal aside. The room felt quieter now, but my mind was still buzzing. I realized that I had a choice. I could continue to let her behavior wound me, or I could use this moment to establish boundaries, to teach her that respect and responsibility are not negotiable. But I wasn't sure I had the courage for that yet. Not fully. The next morning, Emily called. I didn't answer at first, letting the phone ring. When I finally picked up, her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Hey, Dad. About yesterday, I'm sorry." I froze. I hadn't expected an apology. "Emily," I started, but she cut me off. "I know you think I overreacted. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we meet and talk?" I hesitated, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to forgive immediately, to restore the peace. But another part of me knew that true reconciliation required more than words. It required understanding, accountability, and respect. "We'll talk," I said finally. "But it has to be on my terms. And this time, we're going to be honest about boundaries." She paused, and I could hear the shift in her tone. "Okay, Dad. I understand." I hung up and sat back, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. I knew that standing firm would be uncomfortable, maybe even painful. But I also knew that bending now would only reinforce the pattern that had brought us here. She had to learn that respect wasn't optional, that love didn't mean enabling, and that her actions had consequences. The day passed slowly, the anticipation of the meeting gnawing at me. I thought about what I would say, how I would remain calm, how I would convey love without giving in. It wasn't easy. My heart ached at the thought of confronting her again, yet I knew it was necessary. That evening, I went for a walk to clear my mind. The streets were quiet, the air crisp and sharp. I reflected on the past, on the choices I had made as a father, and on the lessons I wanted to pass on. I realized that this confrontation, as painful as it would be, was an opportunity to redefine our relationship, to set boundaries that could ultimately bring us closer, not drive us further apart. By the time I returned home, I felt a small measure of resolve settling over me. I would not let this incident define me as a father. I would not allow humiliation to dictate my actions. I would approach the next meeting with clarity, patience, and unwavering principles. And most importantly, I would hold her accountable, not to punish her, but to teach her the respect and responsibility that love truly demands. The next morning, I prepared myself. I dressed neatly, choosing clothes that made me feel grounded, confident. I reviewed the points I wanted to make, rehearsed how I would respond to anger, and reminded myself to breathe, to listen, to remain calm. I knew this conversation could escalate, but I also knew it was necessary. The future of our relationship depended on it. When I arrived at the cafe, Emily was already there, sipping a cappuccino with an almost casual air, as if nothing had happened. Her eyes met mine, and I could see the tension flicker there. The remnants of yesterday's storm. She offered a small, tentative smile. I returned it, keeping my own emotions in check. We ordered our drinks and sat down. The air between us was thick, charged with unspoken words and raw emotion. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched her closely, noting her posture, the way she avoided eye contact, the subtle signs of remorse mingled with lingering frustration. Finally, I spoke. Emily, yesterday was difficult. I want to understand why it escalated the way it did, but I also need to make something clear. I cannot, and will not, put myself at financial risk to cover your choices. That's not just about money. It's about responsibility, trust, and respect. Her eyes widened slightly, and I could see her struggle to respond. Dead. I didn't mean to. I held up a hand gently. I know you didn't mean to hurt me physically, but emotionally, there was damage, and it's important that we address it. This isn't about punishment. It's about learning that actions have consequences, and that love doesn't mean enabling bad decisions. She nodded slowly, a mixture of guilt and defiance in her expression. I understand. I wanted it to be easier. I took a deep breath. I know, Emily. I know you did. But life isn't always easy, and learning to navigate it responsibly is part of growing up. Part of being accountable for yourself. For the first time, I felt a shift in the dynamic between us. It wasn't complete resolution, but it was a start. A fragile, tentative beginning where boundaries were acknowledged and respect had a chance to rebuild itself. After the cafe conversation, I walked home slowly, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. Relief because I had finally spoken my truth and set boundaries. Exhaustion because doing so had taken a deeper toll than I anticipated. My legs felt heavy, my mind replaying each word I had spoken, each glance she had given me. There was a lingering tension in the air, an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. It was the kind of weight that made you question everything. Your decisions, your parenting, your judgment. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and sank into my favorite armchair, staring blankly out the window. The sky was turning a soft orange as the sun began to set, but I hardly noticed. My thoughts were consumed by Emily, by the confrontation, and by the realization that our relationship had changed in ways I wasn't fully prepared to handle. I thought back to her childhood, to the way she had always been strong, willed, determined, and sometimes stubborn to the point of recklessness. I remembered the sleepless nights, worrying if I was doing enough, worrying if my love was being enough. I remembered the times I had given in to her demands, thinking it was easier to let her have her way than to fight. And now, years later, I saw the consequences of those choices laid bare before me. Sitting there, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Had I enabled her sense of entitlement? Had my occasional indulgences and compromises taught her that rules were optional when she wanted something badly enough? The thought was painful, but it was also a necessary reflection. I had to acknowledge my own role in shaping the person she had become, even if I couldn't control her actions entirely. I took a deep breath and reached for my journal. Writing had always been my way of processing complex emotions, and tonight, I needed clarity more than ever. I began by recounting the cafe incident in detail. The way she had stormed in, her tone, her gestures, the moment she threw the coffee. I described my own reactions, my shock, my hurt, and my anger. Putting it all on paper somehow made it feel more real, more tangible, and less like a chaotic storm swirling endlessly in my mind. As I wrote, I began to notice patterns in my thoughts. I realized that much of my pain wasn't just about the incident itself. It was about the expectations I had for our relationship. I had always believed that love and respect were intertwined, that teaching responsibility was part of loving her, and that a parent's guidance would naturally be valued. But life had a way of challenging even the most firmly held beliefs, and Emily's behavior had forced me to confront the uncomfortable truth that love alone doesn't guarantee respect. I thought about the conversations I had with friends over the years, the advice I had received, and the moments I had quietly ignored, hoping they were just phases. I remembered Mark's words, "Children sometimes forget the line between love and entitlement. They don't mean to harm, but they can cause pain in their pursuit of what they want." Emily hadn't meant to humiliate me, not entirely, but her actions had that effect nonetheless. The more I reflected, the more I understood that this was about more than money. It was about control, about the power dynamics that had developed over the years. She had grown accustomed to testing boundaries, to pushing limits, and to expecting me to cave. And when I finally stood firm, when I finally said no, it had triggered a reaction she hadn't anticipated, because for so long, the balance had always been in her favor. The evening stretched on, and I found myself thinking about the future. How could I navigate this new dynamic? How could I maintain a loving relationship with my daughter, while also enforcing boundaries that she might resist? The questions were heavy, but they were necessary. I realized that being a parent didn't end when children became adults. It simply evolved into something more complex, more challenging, and often more painful. I thought about the potential paths ahead. One option was to continue placating her, to give in to her demands in the hopes of keeping peace. But I knew that path would only reinforce the cycle, leaving me vulnerable to further humiliation and disappointment. Another option was to maintain my boundaries, to assert my principles, even if it caused temporary conflict. That path was harder, but it promised long-term growth for both of us. As I sat in the quiet of my living room, I felt a flicker of resolve. I would not allow this incident to define me as a father, nor would I let it dictate the terms of our relationship. I would stand firm, but with patience and compassion. I would teach Emily that love is not conditional on compliance, and that respect is earned, not demanded. Sleep came fitfully that night, my mind oscillating between frustration and hope. I dreamt of her, of the cafe, of the spilled coffee, and of countless moments from her childhood. Each dream was tinged with both sorrow and understanding. A reminder that our relationship was a living, evolving thing, capable of growth if nurtured carefully. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt the night before. I knew that confrontation and reflection were only the first steps. There would be more challenges ahead, more tests of patience and resolve. But I also knew that this was an opportunity to rebuild trust, to redefine boundaries, and to model the principles I hoped she would one day embrace. I decided to reach out to Mark again, needing to talk through the next steps. When he answered, I felt a sense of relief. "Hey, Dad," he said. "How are you feeling today?" "I've been thinking a lot," I replied. About Emily, about the cafe, about everything. I realized that this isn't just about money or humiliation. It's about respect, boundaries, and learning to navigate adulthood responsibly. And I need to approach the next step carefully. Mark was quiet for a moment, then said, "It sounds like you're seeing the bigger picture. That's important. You're not just reacting emotionally. You're thinking strategically. That's the kind of guidance she needs, even if she doesn't realize it yet." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. His words reinforced the understanding that I was beginning to gain, that being a parent sometimes meant enduring discomfort, and even temporary conflict for the sake of long-term growth. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As the day wore on, I reflected on the past, on my mistakes, and on the lessons I wanted to impart. I realized that setting boundaries didn't make me a harsh father. It made me a responsible one. It made me someone who valued love and respect equally, and who understood that true guidance often requires difficult decisions. By evening, I felt a cautious sense of peace. I had confronted the pain, examined my role, and begun to understand the dynamics at play. I knew that the next encounter with Emily would be crucial, but I also felt prepared in a way I hadn't before. I was no longer just a father reacting to his daughter's outburst. I was a parent with clarity, purpose, and a commitment to principles that would guide both of us forward. Sitting in the quiet of my home, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The storm of yesterday had passed, leaving behind a landscape of reflection, learning, and tentative resolve. I knew there would be challenges ahead, more tests of patience and understanding. But I also knew that with careful thought, honest communication, and unwavering principles, there was a path forward, a path that could restore balance, rebuild trust, and ultimately strengthen the bond between a father and his daughter. The days following the cafe incident were quiet, almost deceptively so. Emily hadn't called as frequently as usual, and when she did, her tone was different, less demanding, more tentative. I could sense that she was measuring me, testing to see if I would waver, if I would apologize for standing my ground. But I knew better now. Standing firm wasn't just about this one loan. It was about sending a clear message that respect and boundaries were not negotiable. I prepared myself mentally for the next encounter, rehearsing how I would speak calmly, how I would refuse without anger, and how I could communicate love without compromising principles. It wasn't easy. There was a part of me that wanted to smooth things over, to restore the peace that had existed before the coffee incident. But I also knew that peace achieved through submission was fragile, hollow, and ultimately destructive. When she called that Thursday, her voice was quiet. "Dad, can we meet tomorrow? I really want to talk." I hesitated for a moment, then said, "We can meet. But this time I need honesty, and I need respect. We're not doing this on your terms alone." She paused, and then said softly, "I understand." The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, giving myself time to settle, to center myself. I ordered a coffee and sat at a corner table, watching as people moved about, oblivious to the storm that had passed here before. When Emily arrived, she looked nervous, her usual confidence subdued. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I returned a measured nod, and we both sat down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I studied her, noticing how her shoulders were slightly tense, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. She seemed smaller somehow, not physically, but in the aura she projected, less in control, more uncertain. I realized that this was the opening I had been waiting for. "Emily," I began, keeping my tone calm and steady, "I want to start by saying that I love you. Nothing I've done is meant to hurt you, but love doesn't mean I compromise my responsibilities or allow disrespectful behavior." Her eyes widened slightly, and she opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could feel the tension in her chest, the unsaid words hovering between us. I continued, "Yesterday was difficult for both of us. I need you to understand that my refusal to Cosign, the loan, isn't a rejection of you. It's a protection of both your future and mine, and it's about teaching responsibility." She sighed, her hands curling into fists on the table. "I know, I felt like you didn't trust me, like you were against me." I reached out and placed a hand over hers, a gesture of calm and reassurance. "I do trust you, Emily. I trust that you are capable of finding your way without me taking risks for you." Trust doesn't mean enabling bad decisions. Part of growing up is learning to navigate challenges on your own. There was a long pause, and I could see her processing my words. Her eyes flickered with frustration, then slowly softened. "It's just hard," she admitted. "I wanted it to be easier. I wanted you to help me." "I understand," I said gently. "And I know it feels unfair, but life isn't always easy, and learning to handle difficulties responsibly is part of becoming independent. That's why I can't just say yes whenever you ask for something." Her shoulders slumped, and I sensed that my words were beginning to sink in. She wasn't happy, not yet, but she was listening. That, in itself, was progress. I continued. "I also want to be clear about boundaries. I won't tolerate disrespect, public humiliation, or attempts to manipulate me with anger. Those behaviors have consequences, and I will not enable them." Her face reflected a mix of guilt and realization. I understand, Dad. I didn't mean to hurt you. You just wanted what you wanted," I said softly. "I get that, but wanting something doesn't give us the right to cross lines or take advantage of others. Respect is a two-way street." She nodded, a small, hesitant movement. I could see that she was beginning to internalize the lesson, though I knew it would take time to fully sink in. I also knew that this was not about punishment, but about teaching her a principle that would serve her for the rest of her life. Over the next hour, we talked, truly talked, for the first time in years. Not just about money, not just about loans, but about her goals, her fears, her struggles, and her hopes. I listened more than I spoke, allowing her to express herself without interruption. And I realized something important. Setting boundaries didn't push her away. It opened a door for honest communication, a chance to rebuild trust on a foundation stronger than fear or indulgence. By the time we stood to leave, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't anticipated. Not because I had won an argument, but because I had upheld my principles, protected my well-being, and maintained love in the process. Emily seemed quieter, reflective, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes that hadn't been there before. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. She began handling her responsibilities more carefully, communicating her needs without demands, and seeking advice rather than immediate financial solutions. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She was learning, gradually, that love wasn't a free pass to take risks or cross boundaries. And I was learning that sometimes, standing firm, even when it's uncomfortable, is the most loving thing a parent can do. One afternoon, she called me unexpectedly. "Dade," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to thank you for yesterday. I know I made things difficult, and I appreciate you being honest with me." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot, remember? Learning respect and responsibility takes time, but I believe you're capable of it." There was a pause, then she said softly, "I'll try. I really will." That simple admission was more rewarding than any loan or gift I could have given her. It was a sign that our relationship was shifting, evolving into something healthier. It was a reminder that love doesn't always mean giving in. It sometimes means guiding, protecting, and holding firm. In the weeks that followed, I continued to enforce boundaries when necessary, always with patience and calm. And slowly, Emily began to show signs of growth. She paid bills on time, managed her expenses more responsibly, and even started saving a portion of her income. More importantly, she began to respect the decisions I made, understanding that my guidance came from a place of care, not control. I realized then that standing firm wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about giving her the tools to succeed independently. And that, in the long run, was the greatest gift I could offer her. By the time a few months had passed, Our relationship had transformed. The tension and conflict that had defined our interactions began to fade, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. We could laugh together, talk openly, and share moments of connection without the underlying fear of humiliation or confrontation. I knew that challenges would continue to arise, as they always do in life. But I also knew that the foundation we had rebuilt, through honesty, boundaries, and love, was strong enough to withstand them. And in that strength, I found not only peace but also pride. Knowing that I had faced a difficult situation with integrity and guided my daughter toward growth in the process. Months passed since the cafe incident, and in that time, our relationship slowly began to mend. It wasn't instantaneous, and it certainly wasn't easy. There were moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, her asking for favors, testing boundaries. But each time, I reminded myself of the lessons we had learned together. I held firm, not out of stubbornness, but out of love. And slowly, Emily began to understand the value of respect, accountability, and self-reliance. One morning, I received an email that surprised me. It was from Emily, short but sincere. "Dad, I wanted to let you know I've finally paid off the loan on my own. Thank you for guiding me, even when I didn't understand it. I know I tested you, and I'm sorry for making things harder than they had to be. Love, Emily." I sat in my chair, staring at the screen, a smile spreading across my face. My chest tightened, not from pride in the way most parents feel, but from the deep satisfaction of seeing her grow into responsibility. She hadn't just survived the lesson, she had learned it. She had faced the consequences of her actions, and in doing so, had gained something far more valuable than money: independence and respect. Later that week, she called. I could hear a subtle humility in her voice, a softening that hadn't been there before. "Dad," she began, "I want to take you out to lunch. My treat. Just to talk, catch up." I agreed, feeling a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. When we met, she was smiling genuinely, and for the first time in a long while, the tension between us felt replaced with understanding. She apologized again, this time face to face, for the cafe incident. "I was wrong, Dad. I shouldn't have treated you that way. I was frustrated, but that's no excuse. I see that now." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you, Emily. It means a lot that you recognize that. And I hope you know that my actions, though difficult, were because I love you. Sometimes love requires saying no, even when it hurts." Her eyes glistened with a mixture of emotion and gratitude. "I understand, Dad. I really do. And I promise to handle things differently from now on." The conversation that followed wasn't about money, loans, or mistakes. It was about connection, about learning from the past, and about moving forward. We laughed, shared stories, and even discussed future plans. Her taking steps toward independence, me offering guidance without interference. It was a conversation filled with mutual respect, something I had longed for since that fateful day in the cafe. Over the next several months, the change in her behavior was remarkable. She managed her finances responsibly, communicated openly about her goals, and treated me with the respect I had always hoped for. And with that change came a deeper bond, a genuine partnership between father and daughter, rather than a dynamic of conflict and rebellion. One afternoon, I received a call that further reinforced the lessons of patience and boundaries. Emily had encountered a financial challenge at work, a sudden expense she hadn't anticipated. She called me, but instead of asking me to solve it, she asked for advice. "Dad," she said, "I don't know what to do here. Can you help me think it through?" I guided her step by step, asking questions that helped her explore options and consequences. She listened carefully, weighed the possibilities, and ultimately made a decision on her own. I realized then that this was the moment I had been waiting for all along. The moment she could navigate difficulty independently, yet still value my guidance. It struck me how far we had come. The coffee incident, the public humiliation, the emotional fallout. It had all been part of a difficult but necessary journey. Without those challenges, without the firm boundaries I had set, she might never have developed the skills or perspective she now possessed. And I, too, had grown, learning patience, the value of consistency, and the profound impact of love that doesn't bend to demands but stands firm in truth. One evening, months later, she came by my house unexpectedly. She carried a small box, which she placed gently on the table. "I wanted to give you something," she said softly. I opened it to find a framed photo of the two of us from years ago, smiling on a summer vacation. She looked at me, eyes full of emotion. "I know we've had our challenges, Dad. But I also know that everything you did was out of love. I'm grateful for you." I felt a lump in my throat. "Emily, this means more than you know," I said, holding the photo. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words and past struggles hanging between us. Then she spoke again. "I know I can't erase what happened, but I hope we can move forward together." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in months. We can, and we will. Because love isn't just about getting along, it's about growing together, even through the hard moments. That night, I reflected on everything. The coffee, the confrontation, the fallout, and the slow journey toward understanding. I realized that the experience had taught both of us invaluable lessons. For Emily, it was about responsibility, respect, and the consequences of her actions. For me, it was about patience, boundaries, and the courage to stand firm in love, even when it was uncomfortable. It was also a reminder that sometimes, the people we love the most can challenge us in ways we never anticipate. They can push boundaries, test patience, and expose vulnerabilities. But if approached with honesty, empathy, and steadfast principles, those challenges can become opportunities for growth, connection, and transformation. Weeks later, as I sat in my living room reflecting on the past year, Emily walked in with a bright smile. "Dade, I just got promoted," she announced proudly. "I wanted to share it with you first." I felt a swell of pride, not just for the promotion itself, but for the person she had become. The way she had learned to navigate life with responsibility, integrity, and respect. "That's wonderful, Emily," I said, beaming. "I'm proud of you. Not just for the promotion, but for how far you've come." She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension, no hidden frustration, no lingering resentment. We simply enjoyed the moment, a father and daughter strengthened by the trials we had faced together. Looking back, I understood that the coffee incident had been more than a moment of humiliation. It had been a turning point. It had forced us both to confront difficult truths, to face emotions we might have avoided, and to grow in ways we never anticipated. And in that growth, we had found not only reconciliation but a deeper, more meaningful bond. The lessons were clear: love isn't always easy, and parenting doesn't end when children grow up. But with patience, consistency, and courage, even the most painful challenges can become opportunities for growth, understanding, and connection. And sometimes, the very moments that feel like the hardest trials are the ones that shape the strongest relationships. Emily and I had weathered the storm together, emerging on the other side stronger, wiser, and closer than ever before. And as I watched her laugh at a small joke later that evening, I realized that the journey, difficult as it had been worth every moment. We had learned to respect each other, to honor boundaries, and to navigate life's challenges together. And that, I knew, was a bond that would endure, no matter what challenges lay ahead.